So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. Today, we'll be talking about women leaders, and in particular, the role that women play in developing leaders in the startup ecosystem and in the tech industry, and the role they play in particular in building companies and cities that are sustainable and innovative. I am delighted to be joined by two wonderful panelists. I'll say a little bit more about who each of them is and a little bit about their backgrounds. Kathy Matsui is indeed a general partner and a founding general partner at Empower Partners. She's also the former vice chair of Goldman Sachs Japan and chief Japan equity strategist. She wrote a groundbreaking book based on her research called Womenomics. And this actually spurred the Japanese government to promote gender diversity. She's also advised corporations on governance and diversity best practices. She has an MA from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, as well as a bachelor's from Harvard. Machi Takahashi is the president and co-CEO of Strolly. Strolly is a fascinating company. It means to stroll with story. And the company strives to essentially develop creativity and diversity by developing state-of-the-art maps. Maps as media and maps as technology. It is the first and the only map media platform in the world that actually integrates beautiful illustrated maps with location technology. Machi Takahashi is also the first Japanese startup founder to ever be selected at South by Southwest as a pitch finalist. So thank you very much to both of you for joining the session. I'd like to start off by asking you quite simply to speak a little bit about your respective experience, but in particular, what you think is the really vital role that women leaders can and should play in building organizations that are specifically sustainable. What your experience has been, but also how you view what you can do now as women leaders and founders. Kathy, shall we start off with you?
Sure, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be on the same stage as Machi-san. There are not a lot of women founders in this country, but we have interacted in the past. And as you know, she comes from Kyoto, or her company was founded in Kyoto. So really great to see Western Japan represented at this conference. To your question, Renee, I think for many of you in this audience that are from Japan will already know this, but I see quite a few faces, at least here in the venue, of people that may not be from Japan or lived in Japan. But the reality of this country, if I can speak from a Japanese context, is that, as all of you know, the demographic challenges or headwinds facing this country are absolutely enormous. The government itself projects that by the year 2055, not that far away, as much as 40% of Japan's workforce population will shrink by a massive, it will shrink by 40% by 2055. In other words, almost half of the current population of Japanese people working is going to disappear. And if you think about the key drivers of any country's growth, it's only three ingredients. It's people, capital or money, and productivity. And so if your talent pool is shrinking by that much, and capital is obviously not infinite, it's finite and probably shrinking because the population here is aging, unless you can produce a productivity miracle of sorts in a short period of time, Japan's potential growth outlook, of course, is going to be very severe. So to me, it's a very simple mathematical equation that, of course, the government's been trying to encourage more babies, higher fertility rates. There's been some moves to promote more immigrants or foreign workers into the country, albeit from my personal vantage point, it's been way too slow and too inadequate. But in the meantime, you have a very highly educated, highly skilled talent pool right in front of you that is not being fully utilized. And so to me, it's very simple. If you want to build a sustainable and growing and thriving economy and society, you need representation from all of those stakeholders, and that includes women, that includes other minority groups, whether it's LGBTQ, foreign nationals living here. It has to be a broad definition of diversity. So to me, I'm not even sure why we have to talk about the rationale, because hopefully everybody understands it, but the reality is we're still very, very far behind in terms of women in leadership positions in this country. But that, flipped on its other side, gives me hope that there is tremendous potential for talented women to really exhibit their leadership skills and create a more sustainable future. I can't help but think of when I was pondering this question, when we were looking at all the nations going through COVID and which countries managed COVID better. We thought about New Zealand and Jacinda Ardern, and we thought about Germany and Angela Merkel. Was it coincidence that many of these countries happen to be led by women? And a lot of the commentary was around, well, women tend to, I know this is a generalization perhaps, but women tend to be more humble about what they know and what they don't know, and listen to experts who do know what they're talking about, and I think have a broader sense of community. How is this pandemic, how is this phenomena impacting our families at a very, very micro level? So to me, I think that's what, I'm not saying male leadership skills are not important. Of course they're important, but I think we need to complement that with skills that many females, I think, bring to the table.
Great, thank you, Kathy. I mean, I think that's fascinating because you touch on some of the very big, intractable issues with optimism, and with the idea that actually there's, in some ways, obvious solutions that ought to be obvious, but really do bear thinking about and bear repeating, because change can be difficult. Machi, do you want to share your view and your experience? 2 to 3 minutes.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here, and Kathy, I'm very glad to be here with you. So my experience, I'm not an expert on female entrepreneurs, but I'm the female entrepreneur myself, so I'm coming up with my own experience. But when I first became the founder of this company, which is 6 years ago, I had no support whatsoever of female entrepreneurs back then in Kyoto. Kyoto is the oldest capital of Japan and 2 hours away from here. It's a great city with history and culture, but there's a lot of manufacturing there, which led for these huge companies like Kyocera or Nintendo. They all wanted to support manufacturers and not the software startups. So there was actually no support for startups, nor female startups. So what I had to do first was to contact the city of Kyoto and asked if I could start my own company, leaving from my R&D company with my patents and everything. And they introduced me to this meetup with female entrepreneurs. But it turned out to be that I was the only information technology person, and all the others were starting their own business with pancakes and hair salons. So I got stuck in this community first. And then I was like striving to get out of it, and contacted this woman from Silicon Valley with a women's startup lab. And then I flew there for 2 weeks, and I realized that there was something called startups, and that I could actually become a CEO of a company instead of waiting for somebody to start business with our patent. But like I could be the leader and then buy out the company and start my own company. So it was a huge difference back then. But now it seems like, because I was in the speech of Governor Koike yesterday, and she announced that there will be $1 billion yen spent on startups in 5 years, which is a huge news. And I want to appreciate Tokyo government because I'm really looking forward to it. And not only that, but Tokyo was one of the very few cities that actually supported female entrepreneurs back 5 years ago with this program called Up to Women, which is a acceleration Tokyo program for women. And that really helped me to actually build my branch in Tokyo and start my business here as well. So I think it's a great opportunity this year to be an entrepreneur in Japan, and also not to mention female entrepreneur.
Machi, thank you. I think it's extremely helpful to be able to talk about concrete solutions, concrete actions that you took to become an entrepreneur, and concrete opportunities that exist. Because it also, in your experience, and also as you talk about, Kathy, it's good for the economy, building and developing women. It's good for the economy of companies in particular. It seems like a no-brainer. But also, in Machi's experience, that's true, but she had to seize the opportunity. She had to find it. She had to go seek it out. And that is so often the case, I think, for women entrepreneurs. It's good to know that increasingly the opportunity is there and to cite it when it's just been offered, as it has been now in Tokyo yesterday. And to remember that, I think, both when you're an entrepreneur offering opportunities to women and thinking about how to build more diverse companies. Getting a little bit more specific now, really, about women leadership and your respective experiences as women leaders. Kathy, you've had an extraordinary career. You have taken on leadership roles in the finance industry, which, not unlike the tech industry, is typically more male-dominated, both in Japan and actually everywhere in the world. You're now starting your own investment company in a culture and a country that that actually does have a unique challenge and has posed a unique challenge for women in leadership. And you've also written a lot about diversity in work and management. But I wonder, on this journey, on your journey, what has been some of the more significant barriers you've encountered, to get to all that success? And how have you overcome that or those barriers?
Well, if we had 3 hours, I'd talk about my very long list of obstacles and barriers and valleys that I've encountered. But maybe I'll talk about, first of all, when I was starting as a Japanese equity strategist, I frankly knew nothing about the Japanese stock market when I landed in Japan. I am Japanese American, so my parents are Japanese, immigrants to America. I spoke some Nihongo, but not anything you would call fluent. So I was really a foreigner, female, and quite inexperienced and young. So it was almost like 3 strikes against me. It was not just, the gender issue. When my clients were institutional investors, both in Japan and outside Japan, but 99.9% of my clients in Japan were middle-aged Japanese men. And so my struggle was, how was I going to compete? And as a strategist or research analyst, you're competing for support, for votes from these investors. And so I really struggled because my team was really tiny compared to the equivalent teams at Nomura, Mitsubishi, Daiwa, et cetera. And so I was really trying to copycat their approach. I was just trying to do what they were doing and trying to do it faster or bigger. But given my limited resources, it was a losing battle. And I didn't realize that in the beginning. I just thought if I copycat and I work harder, or, maybe over time I'd win, but I never made any progress until one day I came to the realization that I can't play the same game. I have to take a different tact and a different approach. And I think for a lot of us women or minority, players in Japan, it's about how do you differentiate yourself, right? How are you going to be remembered, or what is your franchise? What is your sort of brand, or whatever you want to call it? And it took a long time for me to realize that. And once I realized that, that's when I did more deep dive thematic research, not just into topics like womenomics. Prior to womenomics, I did a whole study on the underfunded Japanese pension system, because after the bubble, stock prices crashed, so most pension schemes in Japanese companies were heavily underfunded. But it took me, weeks to do this kind of research, but it actually put, I think, my name on the map, or at least let my clients remember who I was, because it was different from what Nomura and Mitsubishi and Daiwa were putting out. The other, I think, challenge I had was, I think many of us, and I don't know if this is genetically wired into women, but we're kind of taught, just keep your head down and work hard, was the mantra I think I was taught when I was sort of growing up and going to school, which of course is an obvious thing to say in terms of advice, but it turned out to be almost the worst advice I could ever be given. And what I mean by that is, working hard, of course, is good advice. The keeping your head down in a large organization, particularly a global one like Goldman Sachs, was not good, right? You had to keep your head up. What I mean by that is antenna, right? Know, what are the promotion opportunities? Know who is important in selecting your next job post. That kind of thing. Just being in the information flow, which I managed a lot of men in my time. Guys are really good at that. Their antennas naturally always ping, always like on the lookout, or what's the next opportunity, who should I be talking to get this chance, to get this bonus, upgrade or whatever. This sort of keeping your head up and cognizant of your surroundings, and knowing the network and knowing the people you should be talking to. It's not gomasuri, as we say in Japanese. It's really educating and being also very upfront about what you've accomplished, right? I've managed so many women who did amazing things, but they never told anybody about that, right? They told me, but nobody else. So my job was like megaphoning those accomplishments. But if you don't tell anybody, you might as well not have done anything, right? And it's not self-promotion, it's education and awareness building. So those are a couple things that I've kind of learned along the way, but it wasn't without a lot of failures, sort of in between.
Yeah, Kathy, thank you. That's very constructive and I think very illuminating. If women in your position and your leadership and your success aren't candid, I think it becomes complicated. And that kind of candor about actually, we're told that working hard is not just necessary, it can actually be good enough. And in fact, working harder will be the thing that will help us compensate, for any kind of inequity or perhaps disadvantage that women may have. But actually, you're saying it's not the right way forward. Yes, working hard is obviously important, but it's not that it's not enough. It's not that it's not the right way forward.
It's kind of like sorry to interrupt, more work smarter, not work harder. Because I think we only have so many hours in a day, and particularly women are burdened with, I think, unfortunately or fortunately, the greater share of the burden of the household or the family and the caregiving. So you have to sleep. And so how do you work smarter, I think is the key.
That's right. I was going to say, you beat me to it. That's exactly it. And I think that the working not harder but smarter is probably one of the key secrets that I think many women need to share with other women. Machi, I'd like to address the next question to you, and a slightly different one. I want to ask you specifically about women in tech. You're a tech founder. You're a CEO. As you mentioned, you work with a lot of designers and engineers. You have probably encountered some specific companies for women in tech. I wonder what those might have been. And I'm also wondering if you have a view on why it is that tech, and especially the world of tech founders, continues to remain so predominantly male.
Well, that's a big question. But
yes, you should. They're two separate questions. Right. So we start with the one, or take the one that you think is most relevant to your experience.
Right. So I used to work in, when I graduated from my college in the US, I started working for this IT venture. And then the founders were both men and women. there are a couple. So I didn't realize that in the tech field that founders were only men until I became the founder of an information technology company. Then I went to these meetups, and I found out that I was practically the only female founder in that in the room. So then I started to dig down that problem and found out that that there are like not many female like students in this STEM field. So it's kind of natural that they don't come into this field. But I happened to work in this R&D company right before I started my own company, where it was the dynamic of the people was very diverse. There were like 30% of the researchers are coming from outside of Japan, both men and women. So I didn't feel that pressure of female being not being the leader in these fields, fortunately. So after I became the leader of this company, I thought, oh, I really have to do something about this. And I chose to select female board members, which is like 75% of our company's board members are women. And that wasn't very difficult, actually. It's hard to find talents of women in this backgrounds. But when you do, you can, as Kathy mentioned, they have lots of things to do in their life that they need time for themselves, or they want to be flexible at work, or they want to have more, they want to challenge new things outside of their own like domain. So it was not hard for me to find female leaders who wanted to join my company, because I was the female leader who is also like doing a lot of errands outside of work. So I could totally relate to them. And I think if we have more female leaders in this tech field, then we would start to see the people who have been COO or CTO of these companies who would become the next leaders. So I think like being present in these tech conferences or tech meetups as only one or two female founders is still very important for me to like just to show up.
Machi, that's really, again, compelling, because it sounds like you've learned as you've gone forward, and learned maybe in some ways not so much from mistakes, but from inexperience, and then had to really sort of build a company that allows you to bring in women and to try to change some of what your experience was. And in fact, I'm curious, 75% female board members is enormous. I mean, that's more than most industries.
Right.
Did you experience any pushback or any kind of complexity or difficulty in doing that?
Well, I was very ignorant enough to go ahead and do it. So I don't think I experienced anything else, but I've heard through somebody that during this VC's fundraising meeting, like during their final meeting, that they've asked if I was going to be pregnant in the future and not being able to continue the work. And actually, they didn't invest in us, and I was like happy that they didn't. But there are other investors who are like purely looking at your business, or that think that they value this kind of team members, and they've stated that to us, that they are very happy that we have diverse members in our team. So it's I don't know, like I don't notice these negative points. I only know the positives that I encounter. And I don't know if I should have been smarter to do it before, but I'm quite happy about it now.
Well, I think what Machi is describing is what we are seeing not just in Japan, but universally, right? I was just in the States, and the percentage of venture capital that is allocated to female founders is something like 2% or 3%. That's in America, which is supposed to be more ahead of Japan.
Absolutely, the numbers are really quite shocking. Exactly.
And is that the way it should be? I'm guessing most of us would agree the answer is no. But if the so-called investors or check writers on one side of the table are of a certain group, right, and that group has some kind of unconscious biases about somebody who's different from them, venture capital is a very risky business, right? And it's already a risky business, and you're going to take more risk because you're putting your money into somebody who doesn't look like you, who doesn't think like you. That's not easy, right? So I'm not trying to justify this, but I think that's a reflection or an outcome of this overall system. So I think it's really important for investors, for other stakeholders in the ecosystem to really understand it's not that women are better than men. We're not trying to make that case here. We're just saying we need to maximize the best quality talent that this country has, or America has, or Europe has. And if we're not embracing that inclusiveness, then you're missing out. It's a pure economic argument, in my view. It has nothing to do with, we need to be fair and equal treatment. It has a little bit something to do with that, but I think it's more there's a real, true economic and business case for doing so. So, I applaud Machi for leading the way, because I think I'm sure that people who come to, Strolly, and they say, Machi-san is the shacho. If I'm a woman in tech and looking to build my career, that to me would be a very wonderful place to, I think, extend my career, led by somebody like her.
Kathy, I think you're bang on, and I appreciate you've led us right to the next question that I want to ask you both, and that really is the question of, it is just good business to create a diverse company, but diversity is obviously not the only thing that really makes for a profitable company. Just really good talent and developing talent is vital. And it's a huge topic in every organization, especially in the tech industry, and especially in Japan. And I know it's been a big topic at the conference. I wanted to ask both of you if you could just say a couple of words or share a couple of thoughts about how each of you in your respective companies as founders, you're thinking about, or as former leaders, you're thinking about how to develop a talent pipeline. Kathy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, we are a small company. It's a small, relatively small venture capital fund. We have $150 million under management. Our LPs, or limited partners, our investors, are investing in us, I think, because they believe that they believe in our hypothesis. And our hypothesis at Empower Partners is very simply, we are Japan's first ESG, environment, social governance focused VC fund, which means that we believe that by helping startups integrate ESG considerations, that can help those businesses scale and sustain their growth. Simple as that. Good governance, diverse leadership, mindfulness of the impact of their businesses on the environment. This is not rocket science. It's very basic stuff. But I think so much in the startup world, you're so focused on top line and, let's build the business and let's get customers, which of course is important as a priority. But if you ultimately want to exit the business through an IPO or M&A, or raise capital overseas with foreign investors, you do have to actually answer to these questions that you're inevitably going to receive once you continue to raise more money. And so for us, it's not a checklist exercise. A lot of people think it's compliance. ESG is about compliance. It's a very negative connotation. But to us, these are the drivers, positive drivers of growth. And I spent my 30-year career mostly at Goldman Sachs working with or trying to convince very large listed household name Japanese companies about why global standards of governance is a good thing, why outside directors on a board is a positive source of value, things like that. And it was frankly pretty frustrating because these companies are huge and established. I call it hard to teach old dogs new tricks. So rather than wait till they're adults, these companies, why not inject these principles when these startups are teenagers, right? that they're younger, more nimble, more flexible, and that can help sustain and scale growth longer term. So that's really the simple philosophy. So for us, and if any of you are interested, we have a very extensive blog. We interviewed a lot of CEOs like Mercari's Yamada-san about why Mercari, one of the biggest P2P marketplaces in Japan or in the world right now, why do they focus on ESG? And he said, for a lot of reasons, but most important, it's recruiting and retaining the best quality talent, period. So I think that's probably for most startups, the #1 priority, because without the people, you don't have a business, right? So for us, this is not a separate peripheral exercise, ESG, it's really central to the core of the business. So for me, talent and attracting and retaining in a very, it's a war for talent right now in Japan. It's very challenging. How are you going to do that if you don't have a culture in your company? You don't have a clear mission and values that you articulate on your website. How do you recruit? Do you recruit openly or in a closed, box process? All of these things I think need to be leaders have to be mindful about if they really want to attract the best talent.
Kathy, that's fascinating how integrated actually the very purpose and mission of your company is with talent and with a talent pipeline and actually with ESG. And on the question of ESG, we'll come back to that actually in a second because I'd like to go a little bit deeper on that in particular, even aside from the talent question. Machi, to you with a talent question, you're in a very different industry. You're in one actually that really is also quite on the cutting edge of innovation and of technology. There's a talent war for that in Japan, but frankly, all over the world in the tech sector, despite the current sort of economy and some of what's happening in big tech, there's so much of those jobs that are still needing to be filled in the U.S. Not to mention, I would imagine in Japan. How are you thinking about that? What does talent pipeline and creating and cultivating one mean for you?
So Japan is known for very, those talents all go to big companies, like large corporations, and they never leave from there. So all the best talents are in large corporations. And it's really hard to find people who want to get out of that benefit or their brand to start working with a startup. So what we do is we look for engineers who come out of, for example, Mercari or these other startups who have become a little bit bigger, and those engineers who want to directly tap into the product instead of just being one of the engineers, but one of the founding engineers. So we have a hard time finding them, but when we do, they get very excited that they can still tackle with early problems and early ideas to build the product. However, these war of hiring people had become more global, and the best talents would go to, for example, if Google or Apple comes to hire people in Japan, they hire people with triple or I don't know how much, but very expensive salaries. So we really have to find people who want to tackle with our product instead of just being happy with any startup. So that's the challenge, and we need to do that through more promotions of our product. However, because we're based in Japan, it's hard to reach out to the international, global human resource. So we're tackling with that right now.
Machi, I'll ask you one follow-up question on that. I think that's a tough challenge, right? You're in an industry and in a space in that industry which is particularly avid for talent, and also in a geography which is difficult to attract and retain that. Are there Are there specific aspects of what you do that you think could be appealing, that you're hoping to develop and make more appealing to retain that, to attract and retain that kind of talent?
Sure. I think just not by promoting our spirit, but also like just our product being out there is the best way to hire and recruit new people from all globally. And what we want to do with our product is to it's a mapping product, but you know, like the map service are made by huge companies, and we want to make it more, you know, local, or some people can express love for authenticity or love for neighborhood. So we want to kind of like promote this product so that the people who love this idea would join us globally. But it's hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, look, it invariably does, right, come back to the core product and a great product. Mm-hmm. But much like hard work, it's not enough.
No.
I want to talk about a different question of sustainability now. Diversity and talent are obviously key. You guys have told us a lot about that, and that's actually fascinating from your respective perspectives. Kathy, I'd like to come to you specifically about ESG. You did decide to launch a really ESG, almost exclusively ESG-focused VC fund. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit of what your thinking is about that, specifically when it comes to the E, when it comes to the environment aspect of that. Why an investment company focusing so much on that?
So just to be clear, we don't just invest in ESG-related companies or businesses. We have 10 companies in our portfolio today. Several of them happen to be in that space, but not all of them are. It's really comes down to, you know, we're not a social impact fund, so to speak. We're a conventional venture capital fund where our investors are expecting us to deliver, you know, very strong competitive financial returns. So first and foremost, we have to find really attractive businesses, hopefully that can scale globally, right? Sure. And then at the same time, though, those businesses, those companies need to be aligned with us in terms of that thesis I outlined earlier, which is they also believe that if they integrate ESG into their core businesses, that will help them grow and scale. And so to us, that's really the core. And the E part, of course, it's kind of an obvious part of ESG, but even for a lot of tech companies, which we invest mostly in tech-related companies, a lot of entrepreneurs will say to us, but why do we have to care about the E? Because we're a software company and we just deal with data. Yeah. We don't have this, you know, big factory somewhere spewing carbon into the air. And we say, but you're using a lot of data, aren't you? How are you managing that data? Oh, on servers, oh, on a cloud. Well, those are not like, you know, imaginary things. Those are run by what? Those are run on using power. You know, there's a lot of energy being consumed in many cases in these data, you know, whatever facilities. So even if you're a software company, you have to be mindful of it. And to me, it's almost like, I mean, I'm probably older than most of you in this room, but my kids who are in their 20s, for them, the E is like, you mean you're even questioning why we have to care about this? This is probably the most compelling challenge of our lifetimes, everybody. And if we don't do something like yesterday, you know, we're all screwed. So to me, it's just, so how do we each play a part? And it's not just what the organization that you work for is doing, but what is each of you doing as an individual, whether it's, you know, replacing PET bottles with, you know, paper or renewable materials? How are you commuting? How many business trips are you doing on a plane? And could you be doing less by using, you know, online virtual communication tools? All these things we think are going to only just do a little bit to impact the overall, you know, whole, but does make a huge difference. So to us, the E is a very, very obvious and a must-have part of any startup's thinking about ESG in that framework. So, for example, we're helping our portfolio companies now measure their carbon footprint. Most of them had never really done this, but it's not enough just to measure it. Then you have to come up with a target of how much are you going to reduce it by, and then what are you going to do to offset that, over the long term. So, yeah, it's not easy.
Thank you.
Very, very.
That's really helpful. I mean, that gives the context of, again, why it's good for business, why it's good for the environment, but also why tech needs to be thinking about this. In fact, Machi, how are you? I mean, within what seems, again, slightly a sidestep away from environmental sustainability or even an ability to have an environmental impact. How are you and Strolli thinking about having a concrete impact on the environment within the context of the strategy in the company?
Well, because we are not innovating the product, but we are also inventing the product itself. So we need diversity in our team for sure. And so that's how we want to keep the team. But also with our product, we enhance the people's civic pride by having this map platform so that they can tell stories about their locals or neighborhood to the other people coming from other cities, so they could work together to find issues around the neighborhood or to work with the people, not just the people in the local area, but with the help of other people who are interested in the area. So that's how we want to promote our product, just to help people share the way they see the world so that it just all comes to mutual understanding. And I think that the whole problem with diversity is that you feel like you don't know the other person or you don't relate to the others, but just by working together or having this kind of product that would show other people's interest might help understand other people's points of view and to make the world a little bit better.
And Machi, again, thinking particularly about maps and cities, are there any particular narratives or aspects about the environment in particular or the climate that are integrated into some of your concepts or some of that community building?
Yes, so we have a lot of communities working on maps in our platform, and there are teams that are showing sustainable shopping maps in in Vietnam, I think, or showing the nature and how it changes along with the climate in Australia. So these ideas that people have can be proposed on these maps, and I think it really tells story about the local issues, which leads to global issues.
Thank you. We're sadly almost at the end of our time, and I want to sort of use the last, we have 1 minute left, so actually I will ask each of you in a very quick sort of 30-second soundbite, and I know that's a challenge. Kathy, Machi, you and I were talking earlier about how sometimes when talking about gender diversity in particular and women in leadership and the challenges, it can get a bit negative. Is there a positive and optimistic word that each of you, or idea or thought that each of you could leave us with or would want to leave us with? Kathy?
Yes, very quickly. So I'm in the venture capital investing world, and we did at Empower Partners a very short study looking at the performance of male-founded startups versus female-founded startups in Japan that IPO'd in 2020 to 2021. The punchline is that the female-founded startups, although they raised a lot less money than their male counterparts, they actually delivered higher market cap at the IPO and higher level of revenues during the year of the IPO. Please look at our website for more information. So my point is that this is not a charity. This is not just about human rights. This is about economic, rational business sense. If you're not focused on diversity, we're missing out on a huge opportunity. So I'm absolutely optimistic.
That's terrific. And Machi, very quickly.
Yes, as an entrepreneur, we need a lot of support from everyone, like all of you, and also from Kathy and Renee. And I would like to encourage, like, for those of you who are thinking about like starting your own company, please jump into this ecosystem without any, fear, because I could do it, everyone can do it. And there's a lot of potential in this ecosystem in Tokyo or in Japan, because it's just started, and like starting something is the most fun time, and I think it's worth joining this venture.
Machi, thank you very much. Again, and thank you so much, Kathy, Matsui, Machi, Takahashi. This has been a really fantastic conversation and a wonderful mixture of realism, pragmatism, and optimism. So thanks again, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.